Madam President, I have 5 requests for committees to meet during today's session of the Senate. They have the approval of the majority and minority leaders.
Duly noted.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, I'm going to spend a very few minutes today to say thanks. I want to thank Chairman Ajit Pai and his colleagues at the Federal Communications Commission. The chairman announced yesterday that he was going to put 5G technology and the American taxpayer first by holding a public auction as opposed to a private auction of what we call the C-band. It was a courageous decision that he made against a lot of pressure. And allow me, Madam President, for just a few minutes to explain why that's important. We've all heard about 5G. 5G, which stands for fifth generation, is a brand new wireless technology. It means incredibly fast internet and cell phone calls. It means the ability to deliver as much as 100 times more data through wireless technology than we can do today. We'll notice it in our iPads, we'll notice it in our computers, but we'll notice it also in our cell phones. And as you know, Madam President, a cell phone is really a sophisticated walkie-talkie. I'll use a cell phone as an example to explain 5G. A cell phone is just a very sophisticated, much more complicated walkie-talkie. How does a walkie-talkie work? How does a cell phone work? Radio waves. The scientific term is electromagnetic radiation. But really, a radio wave is just what it says, a wave that goes from my cell phone, say, to the president's cell phone through an antenna and a transmitter and a receiver. A radio wave and the air through which it travels and the right to send a radio wave is a sovereign asset. Belongs to the American people. American people own that radio wave and the right to send it. And our FCC gets to decide who gets to use those radio waves and who has the right to send those radio waves. There's a particular type of radio wave that is absolutely perfect for 5G. It's between 180 megahertz and 300 megahertz. Why are these radio waves so perfect for 5G? Well, because they strike a balance. First, these radio waves in that spectrum, as it's called, can go a fairly long distance, and they can carry huge amounts of data. That's going to make possible driverless cars. We've heard about those. The Internet of Things. That's going to make possible remote surgery where a doctor in one place physically through the internet using a robot can perform surgery on someone 1,000 miles away. 5G going through these special radio waves is going to make all that possible. It's going to change our lives. Those radio waves, I'll call them the C-band spectrum, right now as I said, are owned by the American people. They're being used by three satellite companies, two from Luxembourg and one from Canada, and some other companies. They're satellite companies. They don't own those radio waves. They don't even have a license to use those radio waves. They didn't pay anything to get to use those radio waves. The FCC said they could use them. It's sort of like a month-to-month lease or rental agreement where you don't have to pay any rent. Some time ago, those three companies came to the FCC and said, even though we don't own these radio waves that you are allowing us to use, and even though the American people own these radio waves, which are perfect for 5G, we're willing to give them up to use for 5G, but here's what we want you to do. The three foreign companies said, we want you to give us those radio waves, and then we will auction them off to the telecommunication companies who want to use the radio waves for 5G. And, this was the kicker, the three foreign corporations said, we want to get to keep the money. And investment bankers estimate that through that auction being conducted by those three foreign corporations, as much as $60 billion would have been generated. That's how much telecommunication companies would pay to get the license to use these radio waves. And some people encourage the FCC to do that. They said, well, the reason we ought to do it is because these three foreign companies, they can do an auction faster than the FCC can. Even though the three foreign companies had never done an auction of spectrum, and even though the FCC has done over 100 auctions, 100 public auctions in other radio waves that the FCC has auctioned off. And by doing that, the fine men and women at the FCC who are in charge of these auctions, they've been doing them for 25 years, they've brought in $123 billion for the American people. That'll build a lot of interstate. It'll educate a lot of kids. That'll pay a lot of soldiers. But our three friends, these foreign satellite companies, still said, even though we have no experience, we can do it faster. If you let the FCC do it, it'll take them 7 years. Well, that just wasn't accurate. I've spoken to the people in charge of doing auctions at the FCC, and in fact, they're going to appear before a subcommittee that I chair on Thursday, and we're going to talk about it some more. I don't know where this figure of 7 years came from, but it's just not accurate. Nonetheless, the FCC came under, there are swamp creatures in the government, we know that. And there are some of these swamp creatures in and out of government put an awful lot of pressure on the FCC. These swamp creatures were trying to help some of their friends in the telecommunications business. One of the foreign corporations spent about $500,000 lobbying. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. We all have the right to petition our government. But that's just a fact. I don't mean it in a pejorative sense. So the FCC was under a lot of pressure. But yesterday, the chairman of the FCC, Ajit Pai, looked at all this. He resisted the pressure, and he announced that we're going to have a public auction. We're going to let every telecommunications company in America that wants to bid on these valuable airwaves come forward and bid. We're going to do an auction within a year, and probably less, not 7 years. And the money that's going to be generated is going to go to the owner of that radio wave, those radio waves. not the foreign companies that through our benevolence are using those radio waves now, but the money's going to go to the American people. I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, gosh, how was this ever even an issue? This should have been a no-brainer. Well, it wasn't. That's part of what's wrong with Washington, D.C., in my judgment. Sometimes, not always, but sometimes the American people aren't put first. But yesterday, A.G. Pye, our chairman of the FCC, put them first. And I just wanted to stand up today and tell him a genuine and heartfelt thank you. I yield the floor, Madam Chair.